Her Excellency Governor General of Belize, Froila Salam, Captain Daniel Mendez, Prime Minister of Belize, Honorable John Briceño and Mrs. Briceño, Her Worship, Madam Justice Michelle Arana, Acting Chief Justice, and other justices of the Supreme Court, Honorable Francis Fonseca, Chairman of the National Celebrations Commission, members of Cabinet, members of the National Assembly, Reverend Lance Lewis and other members of the clergy, Mayor of Belmopan, Mayor Sharon Palacio, Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps and members of the Consular Corps, Commandants of the Uniformed Forces of Belize, other distinguished guests, and of course, beautiful Belizeans at home and abroad. My friends, 40 is such a milestone, a fair enough mark of growth and accomplishment, and yet relatively short in terms of nation building. As we take stock today, we would have to conclude that we are at one of the most challenging times in our nation's history. I say challenging because never before has this nation faced the threats to its very existence as it does today, not just from the invisible enemy of the dreaded coronavirus, not just from the ravages of escalating crime and violence that plague our society, but from a lack of political willpower to change the circumstances that led us to where we are today. The age of 40 is a profound number for Belize. As it stands today, some 78% of our population represents citizens that are younger than the nation itself. I myself was only 3 years old when Belize gained its independence in 1981. And the comparatively few Belizeans alive today ever knew this nation before it became independent. Yet we are being governed by a generation that has not yet grasped the message that this nation, at 40, has to harness the fortunes heaped upon it by nature and by God, and must carve a new future for those that know no other home but this blessed land we proudly call Belize. Despite our solid democracy that has ushered in changes in administration, successive leaders of this nation still persist in holding on to some of the old ways of governing. This tradition of governance for the favored few, while paying lip service to the many just to get a vote on election day, still remains intact. This outright refusal to modernize our nation and its institutions to carry out the mandate of meaningful nation building has led to the slow crumbling of our structures of governance and our society right before our very eyes. This nation was founded by the work of our forefathers, Philip Golson, George Price, Lee Richardson, and more recent luminaries like the Right Honorable Sir Manuel Esquivel, the Right Honorable Dean Barrow, and others that have set the bricks in place for a foundation upon which our generation must build new structures. In 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, a new mandate was handed resoundingly to the People's United Party to do just that, to stand on the shoulders of these giants and to fulfill a promise to the Belizean people that a new course will be charted and that policies will be developed so that, as they promised, everyone can win. The backdrop of this shift in administration in itself was quite remarkable. Belize was enduring perhaps the worst set of economic conditions it has ever faced in its history. Our main income-earning industries were on their knees, with tourism facing the largest drop ever, and our agriculture and productive industries suffering global shortages and escalating prices, while at the same time facing unprecedented falls in demand due to worldwide lockdowns as a result of measures to curb the spread of the virus. the inheritance of reins of power by the PUP came at a very meaningful time. People were stressed to the limit from the constantly changing measures enacted to curb the spread of the virus. Employment was at an all-time low, and the end seemed to be so far away. Yet, our people grasped at the straws of hope that the incoming administration offered. We, the then government of the day, accepted our defeat with humility. We took the few new seats on the other side of the House and surrendered our faith with the hope that better would indeed come to this nation that desperately needed to survive and to succeed. 10 months later, as we look back at the promises and reminisce at the euphoria that followed the landslide victory, all we can do is to hang our collective heads in despair, like spurned lovers regretting our mistake, because all the grand promises that were made that gave us hope seem to have been long forgotten. In place today, we see a fast return to a state where those with the privilege to be connected to the leadership of the new administration are enjoying the fruits of that victory, while poor Belizeans lost their badly needed support that previously came from programs like monetary COVID relief programs, the food security program, and the myriad of other support programs that Belizeans relied on prior to November of 2020. Our hardworking public officers, our security forces, our teachers, and our frontline healthcare workers who stood shoulder to defend this nation against the unseen enemy of COVID-19 and who previously enjoyed the assurance that their salaries would remain intact, very quickly learnt that the new administration inherited no such conscience. Previously, thousands of Belizeans who lost their jobs in tourism and other sectors, who depended on the weekly stipend to offset their losses and who relied on the grocery packages to supplement their livelihood, trusted that the government would continue to protect them from predatory lenders and heartless landlords as they strive to rebuild their lives from the losses brought upon them in 2020. These Belizeans learned very quickly that the new priority has been to serve the economic masters who desires to grow their bank empires and expand their economic control on our nation. Their priority is to create newly minted millionaires to supply the very tools like testing and other medical interventions that are so desperately needed to fight the pandemic. Belizeans learned that the protection from the virus suddenly comes at a cost, as free testing by the government was quickly replaced by high-cost private clinics, imposing yet another burden on our already struggling population. Belizeans learned quickly that decisions on our own health and our economic well-being are no longer made with any level of consultation, but behind closed doors, with directives recited by authoritative figures with little or no explanation. We watch our freedoms being curtailed, with scarcely an opportunity to ask a simple question or to get clarification, but only to listen to pre-recorded recitations filled with errors by a leader reading from a teleprompter. Belizeans learned quickly that some citizens are more equal than others, as exceptions to the new draconian rules get granted in secrecy, only revealed by documents that come to light after the fact, or more recently in quietly published notices in the government gazette. Suddenly, special weddings and funeral permits are granted while the majority of Belizeans in small businesses are forced to close their door and to lay off workers that badly need work. Belizeans learned very quickly that no institution is sacred, not even one that is owned by the people and the workers of Belize. We learned that priority will be given to a favored, closely connected company in the guise of competition, despite the damage that such a move will cause on the viability of the investment of thousands of Belizeans in our national telecom. Ladies and gentlemen, it is high time that we demand that the government reset itself to return to the mission that they were given in 2020. This mission to guide our nation through the troubling time cannot be tainted by personal interests, misinformation, and pre-recorded messages that say nothing. This mission must begin to address the scourge of crime and violence that has exploded in our streets and that is stretching our security forces to the breaking point where they themselves are acting as badly as the criminals they are policing. This mission must find a way to return our children to a stage of normalcy when it comes to education. Unless we find a way to equalize access to education, whether inside classrooms or virtually, this current dynamic will only result in a widening of inequality as this present generation of students strive to enter the productive society in the next few years. Income inequality as we know it today can only get worse unless all our students at all levels in our schools are given the same opportunity to learn. This mission must find a way to bring our economy back to a sustainable path. It means that the environmental stewardship must not take a backseat to special interests that want to pollute our forests, our watersheds, and our oceans just to satisfy the greed of a few. It must focus on rewarding our productive Belizeans in agriculture and tourism with the type of incentives that will help them to weather the storms of COVID, climate change, and rising global inflation, not just a few that can cream off the hard work of the many. This mission, ladies and gentlemen, must bring back fair play to our workers. It must respect the power of collective action by our union brothers and sisters through meaningful consultation and dialogue, and it cannot continue to use force and coercion to ram unfair policies through its super-majority position in the House of Representatives. Likewise, the important goal of getting our country safely through the pandemic must be rethought. Our government has to communicate with the nation in a meaningful way through two-way consultation and participation, and the decision-making table must have representation by all sectors of our society. Ladies and gentlemen, a Belize at 40 ought to be an age of maturity where our institutions, our infrastructure, and our socio-economic backbone is strong, where citizens enjoy good health, a high level of education, public safety, and where inequality is minimized. Yet today we face a dismantling of major initiatives that have set the stage for Belize to propel forward as a beacon of human development. These initiatives, like our social programs that were all but abandoned, like our environmental initiatives that were repackaged and painted blue, like our solid waste program that is now in shambles as our municipalities fare near bankruptcy and cannot even retrieve our garbage, were all a part of the foundation that I previously described. I speak today to that 78% that only know this nation in its present form as the free and independent nation of Belize. I ask that all 333,508 of you, along with all other Belizeans of all ages and from all walks of life, that you make your voices be heard, loudly telling the government that you will not tolerate this misguided mission that has replaced the trajectory that this country was on before November 2020. You need to let your voices be heard before the freedoms that you enjoy today are taken away. You need to use the power of the electronic media that you have in your hands, because make no mistake, the freedom is in jeopardy, disguised as competition at the hands of the very people that suppressed that technology before it was liberalized. I pledge today to join with your generation in this call for the good governance that was promised, for the transparency and accountability, and for the social safety that we have all come to enjoy. This pledge comes with no limitation, because even though we are being called talentless, it is our voice that will prevail. It is our voice that has to lead the charge, because this is our nation, our future, and the inheritance of our children and of the many generations to follow that is at risk. Recently, there has been some turmoil in our own United Democratic Party. Turmoil that reared its ugly head in the form of hatred, deceit, and disunity. Turmoil that didn't make for our strongest position as this country's loyal opposition. The fact that it would only be in accentuating the U in the UDP that we would be progressive dawned on us eventually, and today we stand more ready to stand in defense of the Belizean people, but perhaps more importantly, to stand side by side with our government to bring about the change that is so desperately needed. Unless my friends from the PUP rejoice in what I guarantee them was a temporary stint, let their history remind them that it was the same kind of disunity that caused them a second loss at the polls in 2012, and that it was the piecing back of the foundational cornerstone of unity that would eventually bring them to glorious victory in November 2020, 8 years later. The lesson, my friends, is that we all know too well, if even only from within our own respective internal party struggles, that to defeat giants, we must unite. And so today the UDP pledges hands and heart in support once again to build this nation. We urge the Prime Minister and his government to join in tearing down the ugly walls that divide us and to rally around the things that make us stronger. A few days ago, I made a personal decision to attend the wreath-laying service for the Father of the Nation, which prior to this year was a solely PUP event. I thought it important to demonstrate that we embrace our political heroes despite our political differences. And I will not lie, the PUP flags and the presence of PUP marshals did make it a bit uncomfortable, but I endured for the sake of unity. It is my hope, PM Briceño, that a similar display for the sake of unity can be made next year if you stay in the country, which has not been your tradition, and celebrate with Belizeans the Battle of St. George's Key Day. Much can be learned from those our forefathers, baymen and slaves who united despite their differences and defended our beautiful and bountiful Belize. Let us in their same spirit and in the same vein unite to defend our country against the COVID pandemic, against crime and corruption, and any other tyrants that threaten our very existence. My friends, 40 years ago today, we embarked on this journey, our hearts and minds filled with trepidation, but with resolve not to fail and never to turn back. 40 years later, with land and sea and people intact, we celebrate and look to the next 40. Let us not be deterred, and in the spirit of our national heroes, George Price and Philip Golson, let us with our hopeful hearts and the steady hands indeed rise together. Long live our independence, and may God bless Belize. Happy birthday.